Have you ever asked yourself, why do I keep doing this? I know better than this. So why do I keep doing this? You've listened to the podcast, you've read the books, you've done the inner work, the manifestation. You know yourself better than you've ever known yourself before, and yet you still feel stuck. If that's you, then today's video is for you. I'm going to share with you 3 reasons why self awareness does not create transformation. And I'm going to share with you what actually does. And make sure you stay on because at the end, I'm going to share with you one question that has made a massive difference to how I approach personal growth. It's a question you can start asking yourself too. And I think it's really going to change the way that you approach how you think about change. I've also created a free resource guide, which takes you through a series of questions that can help you move from awareness into action. Hi, I'm Christine Burke, the Midlife CEO, and I help faith-fueled women over 50 discern God's calling and lead with confidence, knowing that your lived experience, everything that you have walked through, you've been through, you've built, you've survived, all of it is the authority that you are standing on from Him. And it's what you can use to lead yourself and others in your second act. So, whatever kind of kingdom calling that you are being called to move forward with, that's what we talk about. Before we dive in, I want to read Romans 12, verse 2. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So I love that Paul doesn't say, be informed. He says, be transformed. He says, be transformed. So understanding is important, but what God actually is inviting us to do is much deeper than information and awareness. It's understanding because he's inviting us into transformation. So let's look at 3 things that make transformation a little bit challenging. Okay, reason number 1, knowing the pattern isn't the same as changing the pattern. One of the greatest gifts of maturity is self-awareness. I waited a long time for my kids to start being self-aware. But as we get older, we start to recognize patterns maybe that we didn't recognize before. And by I mean older, I mean over 50, midlife women. And here's some examples. So number 1, we apologize too much. So you notice you say sorry for things that really are not your doing, not your responsibility, not your fault, but you say sorry regardless. We sometimes over explain our decision, right? We look for reassurance before we look within. We look for acceptance for simple decisions that we are looking to make. And we sometimes realize that difficult conversations, well, those are things that we just need to avoid because sometimes we don't want to disappoint people. So all of that awareness is really valuable because you can't change something that you're unwilling to notice, that you're unwilling to acknowledge and see. And so awareness only tells you what the pattern is. It doesn't create a new one. So I often think about it like going to get an x-ray, for example. So when you get an x-ray, the x-ray can identify exactly what's causing your maybe shoulder pain, right? Or it can identify that you well and truly have a broken bone somewhere, but it's not going to heal the injury clearly, right? And so it reveals the problem, but the healing of that only comes after. But you had to actually know that something was wrong in the first place. So the same is true in our personal growth. So awareness helps us identify the pattern. And oftentimes these are patterns that are not serving us, right? They're not serving us in our lives, or they did serve us at one point, like, doing your kids' laundry or certain things in your relationship. Maybe at one point they served you, but they don't anymore. And so this means that we need to start responding differently. So I want to ask you a question. What's the one pattern that you have become aware of just listening to this, but that you're still repeating? Reason number 2, transformation happens through practice, not through insight. So for a long time, I believe that if I just understood what I needed, if I understood, why I was stressed or anxious, or if I understood my traumas and what had gone on in my past and how it was influencing my future, this was all before I knew God, of course. But we get to the point where we realize that We need to actually start doing things differently, like doing things, the actions that we're taking. And that includes, thoughts that we have in our head, right? Questions that we ask ourselves. Now, a lot of times that might be the enemy dropping things in the back of your head. You can't change, you won't change, you can't do this. This is what you always do. We have to be really careful about that. So at one point, I honestly thought that once I understood why, for example, I was doubting myself, right? I'd had enough experiences that had started to prove to me why I was doubting myself, right? This is what you always do. You always doubt yourself. And then, you don't get the result that you want. Or once I realized why or that I was people pleasing, right? Then maybe that would lead me to stop relying on people's approval. So think about learning to drive, right? This is kind of a basic example, but think about it. You learned to drive well because you got in the car and you drove over and over and over again. That's how you became confident in the doing. Now, I call this kind of thing for the midlife woman is authority reps. Okay, so one example would be setting boundaries, right? So if you continue to people please, or you continue to do things that you really don't feel good about, but you're concerned about someone's approval, maybe even in the home, right? You want to keep taking care of your teenage or young adult children. You want to keep doing things for them, right? But you start becoming aware that maybe this isn't good for me anymore, and maybe it actually isn't good for them either. And so an example here would be practicing what I call the authority rep. So what is it? The authority rep is you practicing setting boundaries on your time, setting boundaries on what you're actually, willing to do emotionally and physically in your life. The authority reps have a lot to do with leadership, right? You and I, we need to lead ourselves in the habits that are required to actually make the change, right? So that you can move from awareness to actually experiencing that growth in your life. So I'm going to drop a link to the Authority Reps training video I did here a few weeks ago. You can get it in the description. Reason number 3, you're expecting change to be comfortable. And isn't this a trap that we all fall into? And it can create a lot of discouragement too. All change is uncomfortable. And that's the uncomfortable thing. That's the truth that many of us have a hard time acknowledging. And so the best way to explain it is that change is uncomfortable because mentally, physically, even spiritually, we get ourselves into patterns, and our brain decides that, hey, anything that, raises your heart rate or, like challenges you from a mental point of view, increases your cortisol, that is uncomfortable. But it's actually required for your brain, your body to lay down new pathways so that you can grow, so that you can move to a new level, so that eventually that set of habits that you've employed to make the change will then become comfortable. What you find uncomfortable for the movement that you're trying to create in your life could be something very comfortable for someone else because they've stepped through it. And I also know that God is not here. I like to say this to myself and others, is not here to hand us what he wants us to do on a silver platter. Right? It wasn't easy for Jesus. It wasn't easy for disciples. It wasn't easy for anyone in the Bible. And so the last thing that we want to do is get comfortable. Now, there's some leeway here. We don't want to be uncomfortable in all aspects of our lives, but what we want to get really good at is starting to identify, what is it that I am being called to? And if you want to find out exactly how to do that, I created a framework. It's called the Midlife Commissioning Blueprint, if I haven't changed the name. But I will put that in the description and you can catch that. But the first step is figuring out what is the calling that you are meant to be stepping into now that you're over 50, now that you have more space and time, now that you're actually listening what God is saying to you. And then the second step is to figure out what needs to change. What are the things that I need to start doing differently in order to step into that calling? And that's where we move into the uncomfortable habits. So if there's one thing I hope that you take away from today's video, it's this: self-awareness is a wonderful place to begin. Okay, it's where most of us do begin, but it was never meant to be the destination. God never wanted us to simply understand ourselves more deeply. He is asking for transformation. And transformation is what happens when awareness is followed by action, leadership. And this looks like small, faithful choices that we make day in and day out. So I want to leave you with one last question. So it's a question that I started asking myself when I started moving deeper into my faith journey. And when I started finding myself full of self-doubt and questioning, why am I like this? Why am I feeling like this? Why do I keep doing this? I ask myself, what would it look like for me to lead myself well in this moment? And that's such a good question, because the better quality, the if you ask yourself a good quality question like that one, you're going to get a very good quality answer. So that question will help you move away from analyzing what you're doing wrong, analyzing the pattern, and it will help you move into faithful leadership. Those small, faithful decisions that we make day in and day out, and not when we just show up on a video or we step into our job or walk into a boardroom. It's about how we lead ourselves in all aspects of our lives from day to day. Sometimes leading yourself well will mean holding on to a boundary or a commitment with your kids. Sometimes it means going ahead and having that difficult conversation. Sometimes it means trusting the decision that you have made and not asking like 1,000 people their opinion before you move on that decision. So you're not just noticing the pattern, you're choosing who you want to become. So that's the question I want to leave you with. It's a question I want you to ask yourself this week. What would it look like to lead myself well in this moment? So again, if you need some help walking through this, I've created this awareness to action resource guide. It's inside the Midlife Clarity Vault. You can get that link in the description box below, and includes the questions that we talked about today. And I'll also give you the authority rep training video. You definitely want to check that out. And so I really hope this video encouraged you. I hope it makes you want to do hard things, and we'll see you next week.